Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the comeback record from Andrew WK called You're Not Alone. I remember when saying that you liked Andrew WK as a critic was a much more polarizing statement than it is today. And let's not mince words. When I Get Wet first came out in 2001, there was a vast gulf between the critics that adored it and those that hated it with a passion. And a lot of it was a factor of that time. It was late 2001. Hard rock was making a hard pivot towards the dark and serious, and here comes an artist with the simplest of lyrics, the most obviously overblown sound and production, all driven by strident piano compositions that seemed deceptively simple. For a set of cynical critics coming out of the 90s and in the aftermath of 9/11, it had to be a corporate calculation gone wrong, or a parody that was years out of date, all of it seeming so damn stupid that nobody in their right mind could ever possibly take this seriously. But in retrospect, time has been way kinder to Andrew WK and I Get Wet specifically because of the gradual revelation that it wasn't really much of a gimmick. Yeah, it was broad, it was goofy, it was ridiculous, but there was a method to that deceptive simplicity that cut across critical faculties into something that was damn near transcendent, rooted in sharp melodic songwriting and the real earnestness and optimism that Andrew WK brought to the table. And sure, it was a little bit one note in terms of the content, although the sound would eventually dive towards mainstream rock before going for outright piano rock or J-pop on later records. But like with Lil Jon and hip-hop, as a collective society, we've decided to keep Andrew WK around, if only because that good-hearted earnestness is only a net positive to culture at large, be it on the multiple J-pop cover records or his motivational speaking tours. Now that said, when Andrew WK announced his first full-length record in 9 years, I won't deny that I was pretty skeptical, mostly because I Get Wet still looms above so much of his career, and even if he had found a way to recapture that party magic 17 years later, the album was still going to run 52 minutes and 16 tracks. You can only hit one note so many times before it just gets kind of stale. But hell, I really wanted a good time with this, so how is You're Not Alone? Alright, if I'm being very honest, I should probably have put this record on the trailing edge and just walk away, because there really isn't all that much for me that needs to be said about it, and my opinion on it crystallized probably faster than any record that I have covered in the past couple of months. But at the end of the day, I have to do this review to reinforce the unfortunate reality that comes from me as a critic. Sometimes there's an artist that you might really love as a personality, but the projects they put out just do not stick the landing, especially when it becomes incredibly easy to point to an act that has a very similar sound and who really, they're doing it a fair bit better. And with this, yeah, it's good, but it's not approaching that height. And here's the thing. I like over-the-top cheesy hard rock and power metal, and even when you can tell that you don't really need to take it seriously, I at least try to put in the effort. And thus, I was prepared to excuse all the broadly sketched lyrics, the gated drums, the compressed guitars driving any sorts of groove off the gleaming keyboard lines, even the spoken word segments that you can tell that Andrew WK was pulling directly from his speaking tours in order to flesh out the philosophy of partying. And you can tell that he is working his ass off. He's trying his damnedest to ensure the verisimilitude of that setting and that state of mind. But here's the rub. He's not the only artist in this vein anymore, fusing broad pop melodies with hard rock or heavy metal. There's still not a lot of it at all. It's a genre fusion that many, especially metalheads, can't take seriously, but I also can't deny that my first thoughts that went through my head upon listening to You're Not Alone is that the Devin Townsend Project were doing this sound with far better production, melodies, and songwriting on Epicloud 6 years ago. And as much as I really like Andrew WK, I'm happy to see him back in this lane, coming back towards the spotlight. There's a lot of hype for this album when the artistic comparison becomes so immediate and obvious in terms of the polished tones and melodic focus. You can't help but realize that he hasn't really evolved much as an artist to bypass some very real shortcomings. Oh, you can tell that he's trying. The record does take diversions into more symphonic instrumental territory, and even has songs where the synthesizers are a much greater presence than the guitars, and those aren't bad. But for as much as he hammers on those keys, the hooks are just not quite as catchy or electric or stick the landing as well as I Get Wet did. Sometimes it's an issue of the tempo, but more often just not quite as sharp or developed. And while I get that complaining about the production on an Andrew WK record is kind of pointless, it's not like I Get Wet was especially dynamic or well produced, but even putting aside comparisons to Devin Townsend, the production on You're Not Alone has real problems. Less an issue of over-polish and more just outright mistakes. It doesn't help your mix sound epic or big when your synth texture or your guitar distortion or your vocals are clipping the edge of your mix, especially when it all sounds so damn clean already. That doesn't sound over the top or huge. It sounds like your guitar pickup or drums or vocals aren't mic'd or mixed properly, and that's a big problem. Now, that's not saying that there aren't songs that click with me. I Don't Know Anything, The Party Never Dies, and Keep On Going, they've got that vintage Andrew WK feel, and the synth-heavy power ballads of Total Freedom and Give Up On You, they are kinda goofy fun. They worked for me. But now we have to get to the content. And look, the one factor when it comes to this brand of over-the-top songwriting is that it doesn't slip toward clumsiness or just embarrassing turns of phrase. And there's unfortunately a fair bit of both on this record on songs like Party Mindset, where it just feels kind of slapdash in its rhyme structure and cadence. It's not as refined as it should be. More to the point, when this record does slip towards one-dimensional headbangers, you run into the possible issue of telling them all that apart. Andrew WK is not exactly a diverse lyricist, and you know what, to his credit, he at least tries to switch things up and space out the more mindless tracks, and further to the point, the core themes of self-acceptance and yet still being able to give into the wild oblivion of a reckless party. I wouldn't structure a whole philosophical movement around it, but Andrew WK's natural sincerity really helps to sell it until you start thinking about the whole philosophy. And you know, I get it. I shouldn't be thinking about it, but there is something a little bit bleak and nihilistic about succumbing to the mindless party because you can't change your inhibitions, and I don't really think the tone reconciles that. And don't get me started on the mentions of God and the devil on this album. I'm inclined to just say it doesn't make much or any sense and just move on. But when you have an entire song called The Devil Is On Your Side, and one of the longer songs here too, highlighting how your vices will always be with you and with some weird framing around it, it's just a weird juxtaposition to place opposite any mention of a higher power or God on this album. But when you couple it with the spoken word interludes, it does unfortunately put me in the mind of certain Christian rock that doesn't really engage all that deeply with the philosophy it espouses. And while Andrew WK has the ability to sidestep a lot of those questions given his over-the-top tone and content, the fact that the broadly sketched lyrics will raise these questions a number of times on a record that runs nearly an hour, look, I can make a lot of excuses, but it's pushing it. It just does bother me. But look, at the end of the day, I'm reminded of reviews of I Get Wet years ago that said it would have been just perfect if it was only just the most transcendent, blisteringly simple moments at that most pure point. And when this record gets close to that, it's a lot of fun. The problem is that the experimentation and extended digressions don't enhance or add to that formula. They just add padding and questions and really sloppy production that only serves to mute the power of the finished product. And when you have some now comparison points in this genre, really it's a lot less excusable. Again, don't get me wrong, I really like Andrew WK as a pop culture phenomenon, and I'm happy he found his lane and cult following, and I'm happy they're getting that record. But for me, look, the production issues really did it in. It's a 6 out of 10. If you're a diehard fan, this is easy to pick up and really enjoy. A little bit too long, but there's enough agreeable personality to take you along for that ride. Otherwise, if you're curious, check out I Get Wet first, and then go to the party from there. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I'm a little bit more negative on this than some people are, but again, the production issues, just, if you have an ear for it, it will really drive you crazy. If you want to buy the record, the link's in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you guys want to tell me how wrong I am. And again, I like Andrew WK. I want to see him get some support, so hey, link to buy. I recommend you hop on board. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right there. If you want to see a schedule, it's linked to my Instagram down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.